Okay, welcome to the Horseshoe Crab Board. I think most of the board is here and getting to the table. We are running behind, so I will talk fast. Welcome, everybody. I'm the chair for the meeting. I'm John Clark from Delaware. I'm joined up here by Program Plan Coordinator Extraordinaire, Caitlin Starks. We have from the Law Enforcement Committee, Captain Nick Couch from Delaware. And we also have our assessment wonder team here of John Sweeka and Kristen Anstead here. So we are well represented up front. Let's move right into the consent agenda. On the agenda right now, there will be a change in the agenda. You have the item number 5 will be considered before item number 4. So item 5 becomes number 4. And in addition, we will have an other business item. There are actually, I think there's a couple of other business items that will come up. So we will get to that at the other business section of the agenda. Are there any other revisions to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved by consent. Are there any changes or revisions to the proceedings from the May 2022 meeting of this board? Seeing none, the proceedings are approved by consent. Do we have any public comment? Okay, this is public comment for items that are not on the agenda. And is there anybody in the room that has any comment? Not seeing any hands. We do not have comments. So now we'll move right into agenda item 4, which is item 5 on your agenda. Take it away. Oh, excuse me. Take it away, John. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could have the presentation brought up, please. Okay, next slide. Okay, as we all remember, the ARM framework was revised and accepted for management use back in 2022. And under Addendum 8, the ARM framework will be used annually to produce bait harvest recommendations for the Delaware Bay. Within that addendum, we have a maximum harvest that can be recommended of either 210,000 females and 500,000 males. Last year, 125,000 females and 475,000 males were recommended for the 2023 harvest season. However, the board did elect to implement a 0 female harvest last year. Next slide. Within the ARM framework, the overall objective statement, as you've all seen before, is to manage harvest of horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay to maximize harvest, but also to maintain ecosystem integrity, provide adequate stopover habitat for migrating shorebirds, and ensure that the abundance of horseshoe crabs is not limiting the red knot stopover population or slowing recovery. Next slide. Okay, the data that go into the ARM on an annual basis that we use then to make a decision include the red knot population estimates from a Mark Rees site analysis. This is conducted by Jim Lyons with USGS and is based on visual counts of birds along Delaware Bay beaches, along with the number of birds that show unique flags or marks on their legs. The horseshoe crab population estimates come from 3 trawl surveys. The Virginia Tech Trawl Survey, the Delaware Adult Trawl, and the New Jersey Ocean Trawl Surveys. These trawl surveys then are incorporated into what's known as our Catch Multiple Survey Analysis Model, which also includes bait landings, dead discards, and biomedical mortality to ultimately come up with a population estimate of horseshoe crabs. Next slide. Okay, here we have the red knot population estimates through time dating back to 2011. And these are the Mark Rees site population estimates that, as I mentioned, Jim Lyons calculates each year for us. In 2023, there were 39,361 red knots with confidence intervals ranging from 33,000 to 47,000. In 2022, there were 39,800 red knots with confidence intervals ranging from 35,000 to 51,000. When we make an annual harvest recommendation, we actually will, for this year, we will actually use the 2022 estimate. And this aligns the bird counts along with the population estimates of horseshoe crabs from 2022, which is the time period for which we have complete data for. Don't worry, this 2-year delay between when we have our population estimates from 2022 to when harvest would be implemented 2024, that 2-year time lag was incorporated in the ARM optimization. Next slide. For female harvest of horseshoe crabs, this is the time series going back to 2003. And you can see in more recent years, the female harvest from the bait landings has declined greatly because of the annual ARM recommendations of zero female harvest. In the black portion of these bars are the dead discards. And in 2016 and 2021, the dead discards went up for females quite a bit. And that was because we had a very high dredge ratio, which influences the overall estimates. Now, we must admit that our estimates of dead discards are pretty uncertain. There's a lot of variability and just reporting issues, within the NEFOP data to generate those. The gray bars here represent biomedical mortality. And in the interest of protecting confidential data, here we represent the biomedical mortality as the total coastwide biomedical mortality, assuming it all comes from Delaware Bay. Next slide. This graph just shows the male harvest through time, and you can see since 2013 the bait landings, are obviously much higher than that for males than they are for females because we've consistently recommended 500,000 bait harvest. But in reality, even the bait harvest, even though the ARM has had recommended 500,000, it's still a few 100,000 less than the actual ARM implementation through time. And again, in black there are the dead discards, and in gray, the coastwide biomedical mortality. Next slide. Moving on to the indices of abundance. These are the female indices of abundance of horseshoe crab from the various trawl surveys. The first line I want to draw your attention to is the black solid line. That represents the mature or the fully mature or the multiparous animals from the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey. And you can see in the last 2 years, we've hit our greatest number over the course of the time series. The black dashed line represents the newly mature or the primiparous crabs from the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey. And over the last couple of years, it's been very low. And in fact, it was 0 in 2022. And I'll discuss this more as we move on in the presentation. The other trawl surveys there, the gray dashed line represents the New Jersey Trawl Survey. And it had some missing years due to the COVID pandemic, but came back online in 2022. And the most recent value from New Jersey Trawl Survey happens to be the highest value since or over the time series dating back to 2003. And then finally, the solid gray line is the Delaware Trawl Survey. And since approximately 2010, 2011, it's shown a consistent increase through time. Next slide. Likewise, the male horseshoe crab indices, again, Virginia Tech in black there, 2 highest values occurred in the last 2 years for the multiparous or mature individuals. The newly mature or primiparous individuals, they have, they were more than what the females were, and you can see in 2022 was actually the highest value for newly mature individuals from the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey. And then likewise, the Delaware and New Jersey Trawl Surveys have generally showed an increase since about 2010. Next slide. So I mentioned that Virginia Tech had 0 primiparous or newly mature individuals in 2022. Well, this is a problem. This is a problem for our catch multiple survey analysis, and we had to come up with a way to address it. So in 2022, 0 primiparous or newly mature individuals. The catch multiple survey analysis is really a simple stage structured model that sums the newly mature plus the mature animals, subtracts the harvest and natural mortality, and then predicts the population next year. If you have a 0 in there, the model will not run. So, this is concerning, and we've discussed among the technical committees 3 possible hypotheses for why the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey ended up with a 0 year. One of them could be catchability. Perhaps the catchability between the fully mature and newly mature individuals has changed or suddenly changed through time, and the trawl survey just doesn't encounter them. The second hypothesis is a recruitment failure. So perhaps, approximately 10 years ago, something caused a decline in the new female horseshoe crabs that has then become evident here in recent years. Or the third thing is possibly an identification issue within the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey. Perhaps many of the newly mature individuals are being misidentified as fully mature individuals. Of these three possible hypotheses, it seems to me that the recruitment failure one is probably the least likely, because it's difficult to think of some sort of a mechanism where newly mature males would continue to increase where females all of a sudden tanked and dropped off to zero. What would it be that would affect female or immature female crabs and not immature male crabs? So this is an issue that the technical committees have given quite a bit of thought to and discussion. Next slide. So one way that we could deal with this, we had to come up with a method to fill in this gap from 2022 with the zero. And we look back at the time series of data from 2003 to 2019, the newly mature portion of the female population was approximately 20% of the total mature, the newly plus the mature. And over that, so that was very consistent up until 2019, and then all of a sudden the newly mature animals just seemed to kind of disappear. So we also have some corroborating evidence from the Delaware Trawl Survey, which in recent years also started to stage crabs. And from 2017 to 2022, Delaware comes up with nearly the same proportion of newly mature individuals at 19.86%. So both lines of evidence show that typically there's about 20% newly mature animals in the mature population. So the ARM and the Delaware Bay Ecosystem TC decided to adjust the 2020 to 2022 data so that the newly mature females are approximately 20% of the total mature population. And this maintained the total number of mature crabs, but this also allows us then to continue to run the catch multiple survey analysis. And this is also supported, by the biology of the horseshoe crab. It doesn't seem like we could possibly get the increase in mature females without some level of newly mature females also being in the population. Doesn't make sense that they would increase, but you didn't have any newly matures entering the population. So next slide. And this graph just shows the Delaware Adult Trawl Survey partitioned into mature and newly mature individuals. And you can see how the two track each other through time. Next slide. And here we have just the percent newly mature in the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey and also the Delaware Trawl Survey. As you can see, from 2003 up through 2018, on average, we're right about 20% in the Virginia Tech Survey. But then all of a sudden in 2019, it declines greatly. Whereas in the Delaware Trawl Survey, we're still on average around 20% there. Okay, next slide. So when we take all this information and put it into the catch survey analysis model, this is the population estimate for mature females in the Delaware Bay through time, starting in 2003 up through 2022. And you can see our point estimate at this point in time is the highest it's been yet. In the catch survey catch multiple survey analysis, we conducted two ways to show publicly. We consider coast-wide biomedical mortality and then absolutely no biomedical mortality to kind of bracket where the truth is. And you can see that the inclusion or exclusion of biomedical mortality makes very, very little difference. And in fact, these lines are basically on top of one another. Next slide. And here we have the population estimates coming out of the catch multiple survey analysis model for males. And again, we're all, the point estimate is at an all-time high and really no effect of inclusion or exclusion of coast-wide biomedical mortality. Next slide. And just for a direct comparison, because everybody got used to the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey and the swept area estimate of abundance being the way that we assess the horseshoe crabs. This graph just shows how the two, a direct comparison between the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey here in gray and then the catch multiple survey analysis in black, the black dash line. And you can see in the two most recent years, our analysis are, they line up very, very closely between Virginia Tech and the catch multiple survey analysis. There are some years where the CMSA was higher, some years when it was lower than the Virginia Tech estimate. Next slide. And this is the same comparison, the CMSA in black and the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey in gray for the male horseshoe crab abundance. And it's interesting that in the most recent years, the Virginia Tech survey actually gave us a higher abundance estimate than what the CMSA does. But they are, still, both of them are at their highest levels in the most recent year. Next slide. So taking this information, we then can make a harvest recommendation based upon the current state of the system. So that means the abundance of male and female crabs along with red knots. And coming out of the ARM framework and our optimization, we have what were known as harvest policy functions. These harvest policy functions then allow us to take the abundance of both species and recommend an optimal harvest. So as per Addendum 8, the recommended harvest is then rounded down to the nearest 25,000 crabs. And this is in an effort to protect confidential biomedical data, because if we put out the exact population estimate, somebody could work backwards and essentially solve for what the biomedical harvest was in Delaware Bay. So for 2024, the recommended harvest coming out of the ARM framework would be 500,000 males and 175,000 females. This is based off 39,800 red knots in 2022, approximately 16 million female horseshoe crabs, and approximately 40 million male horseshoe crabs. Next slide. When we then take these harvest recommendations and apply the allocation scheme that was part of the Addendum 8, and also maintains, which partitions horseshoe crabs based on their proportion that are actually of Delaware Bay origin, and also institutes an Addendum 4 cap for Maryland and Virginia. These are the quotas, the harvest quotas that would ultimately result for 2024. So you can see of Delaware Bay origin, we sum the crabs up across the states, 500,000 males, 175,000 females. And for the total quota, it's slightly more with 513 total males and 185,000 total females. Next slide. And with that, I can take any questions on the 2023 results and the 2024 harvest recommendation.
Thank you, John. And before we take those questions, I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin to put up a couple of slides.
So just to start your conversation off for the board's consideration today is to set the 2024 Delaware bait harvest specifications. Next slide. And I just provided this as an alternative as well, considering what was approved last year. So this is here as well if it needs to be viewed or discussed.
Thank you, Caitlin. And with that, we'll take questions for John or comments about the harvest specifications. Any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Oh, Shanna Madsen.
I was seeing no questions, so I was prepared to make a motion.
Very good. In that case, go right ahead, Shanna.
All right, I'll wait for a second because I know I've got it up there. So the motion is moved to accept the 2024 Adaptive Resource Management Harvest Specifications with 500,000 males and no female harvest on the Delaware Bay origin crabs. In addition, the 2-to-1 offset will be added to Maryland and Virginia's allocations due to no female harvest.
Thank you, Shanna. Do I have a second? Craig Pugh is the second. Any discussion on the motion? Shanna, did you want to say anything about it?
Sure, yeah, I can make a couple of comments on the motion. My justification for making this motion is similar to the one that we made last year. I think that we've heard from the public that right now there's not an appetite for female harvest. So the Mid-Atlantic states have decided to continue utilizing the offset and only having male harvest. I do think that setting the specifications this way leads very well into our next agenda item, and some ideas that I have moving forward on how to handle years where we're going to continue to only have male harvest, even though the ARM recommends to us that we can also harvest females.
Thank you, Shanna. Craig, did you have any comments you'd like to add?
Yes, I agree. At this time, I know we've explored the female harvest, but it's obvious to us, the people of the state of Delaware, really don't want to accept that. They have no appetite for that. So this seems to be the most reasonable solution, and we're willing to accept it. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Any further comments on the motion? I see Joe Semino.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to John for the presentation. I'm encouraged by the recent numbers, but it was a long time getting here, so I fully support this motion because I think we need to get a few more years under our belt before we really start considering this. So, in fact, I know we can't make motions that we have to revisit this every year and can't make a motion for no female harvest into the future, but I certainly hope that, you know, others around the board would support that until we, you know, see this positive trend increasing for a fair amount of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. And I think that will probably segue into a topic we'll be touching on. But for the meantime, because I don't see any more hands, are there anybody hands online? None online. So in that case, I don't think anybody needs to caucus. Is there any need to caucus? Seeing none, why don't we try doing this the easy way? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion is passed by consent. And before we leave this topic, anybody want to talk about the specifications going into the future? Didn't want to talk about that. Okay, we'll get back to that after we talk about the results of the survey. So I'm going to turn it back over to Caitlin to cover the stakeholder survey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to try and go quickly through this given the time. So I hope you all had a chance to read the report. But in this presentation, I'm going to cover the background on the survey, the methods used, the results, and then talk about next steps. So to start, the ARM framework was established back in 2013, or implemented in 2013, and that's been used to set bait harvest specifications for horseshoe crabs of Delaware Bay origin, with consideration of abundance of horseshoe crab and red knots. That was peer reviewed in 2020. The revision was peer reviewed in 2021 and approved by the board for use in 2022 and officially adopted for setting Delaware Bay specifications under Addendum 8. So during the public comment process for Addendum 8, the public expressed significant concerns and over 30,000 comments about the status of the red knot population in the Delaware Bay and the potential impact that could have with the limited female harvest that was allowed for under the revised ARM. So in light of those concerns, the board set the 2023 specifications with 0 females and using the 2-to-1 offset. Next slide. So this May, the board discussed approaches for evaluating the current goals and objectives for the Delaware Bay horseshoe crab fishery and ecosystem, and they decided to form a work group to develop a survey that would be distributed to stakeholders of the region, including bait harvesters and dealers, biomedical fishery and industry participants, and environmental groups in the Delaware Bay region. And the purpose of the survey was to provide the board with information to help them evaluate the current management objectives. The work group met 4 times in June through September to develop the survey. And these are the overarching questions that the group aimed to get insight into through this survey. So a key question that could help inform management is whether or not there's demand for the harvest of female crabs in the fishery. Knowing that many feel female harvest should not be allowed at present, from those public comments, what are the conditions that would make stakeholders comfortable allowing female harvest? What management goals for the Delaware Bay region are important to stakeholders? And ultimately, should the board consider changes to the management program for the Delaware Bay bait fishery? The survey was developed by the work group and reviewed by a social science researcher to improve the questions and remove sources of bias. The work group then identified a pool of stakeholders from the Delaware-based states of New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, collected their contact information, and were able to send the survey out to 107 individuals through SurveyMonkey at the end of August. And the table here is showing the numbers of stakeholders in the target stakeholder groups and states. So now I'll move on to the results. We had a 38% response rate to the survey with 40 responses. The largest numbers of respondents were from New Jersey, and the largest number for primary field of work were from commercial fisheries. So as you'll see later, the groups that were identified from the responses in question 2 about field of work were used to break out the responses to some of the later survey questions to see how these stakeholder groups responded. And additionally, the commercial fisheries group was administered a specific set of questions that were aimed to get a better understanding of the fishery and the perspectives of the commercial industry. So first, the commercial fisheries group was asked what the horseshoe crabs they harvest or sell are used for. Most said bait or both bait and biomedical, and 1 said they did not know. 14 respondents also said they have harvested female horseshoe crabs in the past, and 5 had not. And when asked how important it is to be able to harvest or sell female horseshoe crabs for bait in the future, the majority said it was very important, and the next largest group said of average importance, and then absolutely essential, and only 2 of those respondents said it was of little or no importance to them. And a strong majority of the commercial harvesters or dealers also agreed that female horseshoe crabs are worth more than males. And similarly, a strong majority disagreed with the statement that there's no market demand for female horseshoe crabs. And when asked to choose between 2 quota scenarios, one where they would have a larger overall quota of only male horseshoe crabs, and another where they would have a smaller overall quota, including some female horseshoe crabs, there was an even split in the responses. So when you look at them by state, you'll see that the respondents from New Jersey tended to the majority prefer the larger overall quota, but respondents from Virginia all preferred the smaller overall quota, including females, and there was insignificant trends in the other states. So that was the end of the slides that were administered only to the commercial fisheries group. The rest of these were applied to all of the survey respondents. So these next few slides are showing the results of question 8 in the survey, which asked participants to respond to 6 statements about different components of the Delaware Bay ecosystem with their level of agreement on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is strongly agree and 5 is strongly disagree. So on this slide are the results to 2 statements. The first is the Delaware Bay population of horseshoe crabs is healthy, and that's on the left. And then on the right, the number of horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay population is increasing. And so the general thing to note with these graphs is how the responses are distributed for each of the respondent groups, which are shown as different colors in those bars. So for some groups, the answers are generally similar among all the respondents in that group, but in some cases, there's not as much agreement, and those responses are more spread out. One challenge that is to be noted for all of these questions is that we don't have equal numbers of respondents in each of those groups, and some of those groups did not have very many respondents, so that makes it difficult to look at those trends. Next one. These are the responses to the statements, the horseshoe crab bait fishery is negatively impacting the Delaware Bay population of horseshoe crabs on the left, and on the right, horseshoe crab bait fishery is negatively impacting red knots in the Delaware Bay. And then these are responses to fishermen should be allowed to harvest female horseshoe crabs from the Delaware Bay population if it is at a healthy level, and fishermen should not be allowed to harvest male horseshoe crabs from the Delaware Bay population if it is at a healthy level. So when you look at the average response to each of those statements by group, which is what's shown in each cell of this table, you can see that there's a lot of disagreement between groups on each of the statements. So in this table, the cells are color coded with the averages that fall on the side of agreement shaded in green and the averages that fall on the side of disagreement shaded in red, and averages that are more in the neutral range are white. So you can see as it alternates back from green to red to white to green, there's not a lot of agreement going across a row with each individual statement by each group. Next. So the next two questions were focused on the perception of different impacts on the horseshoe crabs and red knots. Here we see that of climate change, horseshoe crab harvest, and human development of the shoreline, the average response from these individuals, they ranked the human development of the shoreline as having the greatest impact on the Delaware Bay population of horseshoe crabs. And that is, again, the average of all responses. So it should be noted that some of the groups responded differently. So the respondents in the environmental group and the academia or research group ranked horseshoe crab harvest as having the greatest impact on the horseshoe crab population. Next slide. And then the pattern and the results for this second question are quite similar to the last. So when they ranked the impact of these three things on the red knots that stop over in the Delaware Bay, so we ranked climate change, reduced egg availability due to horseshoe crab harvest, and human development of the shoreline by the level of impact. The environmental and academia groups both ranked reduced food availability due to the horseshoe crab harvest as the highest impact, and the commercial fisheries and biomedical groups ranked human development of the shoreline as having the highest impact. The next set of questions focused on the importance of different management objectives to the respondents. So first they were asked how important each of these 7 items on the left were on a scale of 1 to 5, from not important at all to absolutely essential. So when all of the responses were averaged, that's what's showing in this bar graph. So the 2 most important issues were using the best available science to inform management and maintaining a healthy population of horseshoe crabs. And again, it should be noted that there were differences when this is broken out by group. And to test this question another way, the respondents were also asked to rank the first 5 of those objectives by their importance. And in this case, the results more distinctly show the pattern where maintaining a healthy horseshoe crab population is on average the most important of the 5 objectives. Next slide. And this matrix shows the breakdown from that last question when the responses were averaged by group. Green is indicating a higher rank was assigned on average. Red is indicating a lower rank was assigned on average, and yellow is an average that falls more in the middle. So you can see here that 3 of the 5 stakeholder groups on average ranked maintaining a healthy horseshoe crab population as most important, though there was a tie for the biomedical group with allowing horseshoe crabs to be used in the biomedical industry for human health. And then 3 out of 5 groups on average ranked maximizing horseshoe crab bait harvest as the least important objective. And then protecting female horseshoe crabs ranked in the middle for 4 out of the 5 groups based on group average. But the rank of the other 2 issues were less consistent amongst the groups. Next. So the next question was asking the respondents if the ARM model should be modified. And of the 36 responses, 47% said yes, 20% said no, and 33% said I don't know. And the respondents who answered yes to this question were then presented with another question, which asked why they think it should be modified. And 16 open-ended responses were given to this, and there was a wide range of responses, but among the commercial fishery members who responded, there was a theme that stuck out, which was the idea that the ARM is underestimating the number of horseshoe crabs. And then 7 responses, mostly from the academic or environmental conservation respondents, spoke about issues with the model and built-in assumptions in the framework. And then 2 comments stated that the horseshoe crab population should be larger before the harvest is allowed to be increased. Question 15 then asked survey participants if they think a limited amount of female horseshoe crab bait harvest should be allowed at this point in time. And 35 responses we had, and 49% said yes, 37% said no, and 14% said I don't know. And this graph is showing how the responses were distributed within each group in the chart. Next. lost my slide. Okay, so then this next question aimed to understand the stakeholder opinions on whether female horseshoe crabs should be collected for biomedical purposes. And again, we had 35 responses, 46% said yes, 43% said no, and 11% said I don't know. And again, the trends are different in how the members of each of those groups responded as shown in the graph. And then the last question in this survey was an open-ended question, and it provided an opportunity for the respondents to add information that might not have been considered in the other survey questions. So they asked, what do you think is the most important? What is most important for managers to consider when making decisions about the management of the Delaware Bay horseshoe crab population? And the more prominent themes in the responses about what is most important were the health of the horseshoe crab population, basing management decisions in robust science, allowing sufficient bait harvest, and impacts on fishermen and coastal communities. And then some other mentions included the larger ecosystem as a whole, allowing for biomedical use, switching to synthetic alternatives to LAL and bait, and making sure there are adequate spawning beaches, and improving the data that are used for management. So to wrap up, I've just summarized some of the key takeaways from the survey that respond to the overarching questions posed by the work group. So first, the commercial industry respondents did show with their responses that there is demand for female horseshoe crabs, and they are considered more valuable than males. The majority of the commercial industry respondents also thought female harvest should be allowed now, but the majority of other respondents did not. Maintaining a healthy horseshoe crab population is considered one of the most important goals across the stakeholder groups. And many of the respondents do think the current ARM framework should be modified, but there are varying reasons behind that option or opinion. And lastly, in general, stakeholders highly value the use of the best available science to inform management. So in response to the survey results, if the board wishes to consider any next steps moving forward, these are a few potential paths. So the board could task the work group with going back and developing additional recommendations based on these results. The board could also direct staff to conduct a more in-depth process involving stakeholders from these various groups, like we outlined when we proposed the options for investigating this issue. And if the board does want to make a change to the management program that was established under Addendum 8, then a new addendum or amendment would be required. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. I think the survey did a great job of confirming what we suspected the different groups think about this. And before we get further into the discussion, I just want to acknowledge the phenomenal amount of work that Caitlin put in to bring this survey together, get it out, and compile that great report. So very much appreciated, Caitlin. And with that, do we have any questions or comments about the survey? I see Dan McKiernan. Go ahead, Dan.
Caitlin, is there any explanation for why female horseshoe crabs are considered more valuable?
The survey did not address that question.
Is there anyone in the room who could?
Dan, the horseshoe crabs, well, Craig can get that, but I think it'll be about eels, right, Craig?
Well, it's not just the eels. The female horseshoe crab is used for bait for conchs, catfish, and eels as well. One of your most marketed differences in landings is when the female horseshoe crab was eliminated in American eel landings. I know that they consider that a depleted resource, but for most of us that fished it, understood why the landings were tremendously lower after they eliminated that from our options. Anybody that's my age, and I consider myself one of the new old guys, and I've said that here before, and I'll repeat it again, that if you have fished with that, and I'd say most of the fellows of that age group would be between 50 to 70, understand, because they've used that bait in the past, and they know that there is nothing comparable to that bait for that type of fishery. It works better than anything else that's out there. Trial and errors that shows there's no artificial bait that can even match it, not touch it. It's like different, it would be like putting a piece of sandpaper in there. anything else other than that. It is that extreme in its catchability, especially when they are producing eggs. Even the frozen, we used to freeze them, cut them, harvest them, pack them, freeze them up for bait, so we could use them through the winter and fall months as well. So because of that, their value was well over 100% of what the male was, and much well over any artificial bait that you could ever imagine. So yes, it was a huge resource for us that was I don't know, taken away about 20 years ago or so. And in saying that, and giving you what my age is, some of the newer fellows that are in our fisheries that are in their 20s to their 40s have not experienced that. They don't know the catchability of that product and what it will do. So, their standards are a little lower than ours because of that. But value-wise, yes, without a doubt, it was highly priced, highly valued. But I think as our groups of fishermen age out, it looks as though the appetite for this is somewhat extinguished. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. And I can confirm what Craig said there. The year after females were banned in Delaware, from 2007 to 2008, our eel landings dropped by 50%. So it really is an amazing bait for eels in the Delaware region. Any of Mike Luisi and then Shanna?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also wanted to acknowledge Caitlin's hard work. You stole the words out of my mouth as chair, being part of the working group. It was not only was it amazing to watch Caitlin put together the survey, but to deal with the 5 or 6 of us was another challenge all of its own. Whether tracking us down or dealing with John, he's Mr. Grumpy, you can barely, you can't find him, and then he's grumpy about things. So Caitlin did an amazing job. I do want to say, and I do want to say this for the record, and I've made this point a number of times before in regard to the female horseshoe crab harvest for bait. I don't know how many years it's been now, but we slowly went from a female crab majority of the harvest down to a 50-50, down to a 2-to-1, down to nothing as far as female harvest in Maryland. And I don't want the board to get the impression that there's no interest in the female crab for harvest for use of bait. It's just that the fishermen right now, given the amount of interest in the topic of horseshoe crabs, shorebirds, and other things, would just rather leave things alone. Although they would make more money, and probably for eels and conch pots would probably do a little better if they were able to buy and sell the females. So I just wanted to make it clear that there's an interest there, and I don't know what the best word is, but the drama around it is more than what the fishermen are willing to deal with. So they'd rather just make use of what they have with the males. And I think in moving forward, if we're taking this survey and thinking of it as giving us a push towards next steps, I think there should be something, if a modification to the arm is the way we go, there should be something there so that when the modeling is telling us that something is allowed to be harvested sustainably, that it's not a fight, it's the best available science, this is what it's telling us we can do. And that next level of argument would be unnecessary. And maybe our fishermen, if the populations of the birds and the crabs were high enough, would be able to benefit from that. So thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mike. Shanna Madsen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a question for, I guess, the dynamic duo, as you called them, Dr. Suika and Anstead. So I want to preface this question with saying that the reason that I'm asking it is not because the arm, quote, sucks. It's because I have a question regarding what we could potentially consider moving forward. I'd like to know if the ARM team or the assessment team has started to consider any modeling approaches or information that you could give the board if we continue to decide to only harvest males.
Okay, thanks, Shanna. We haven't really discussed it formally amongst the ARM work group. I certainly have a few ideas that if we're going to continue with male-only harvest, essentially the process could be a lot simpler and rely on a lot less data. But again, that's a conversation. I have some thoughts, but they haven't been discussed with the entire committee or with other stakeholders yet.
Thank you, John. Thanks, Shannon. Further questions, discussions? Okay, I believe at this point, is there anybody online, Caitlin? Okay. Do you want to put the slide back up that had possible next actions here for this, Caitlin? Okay, so Caitlin outlined the next steps, and Shanna, you have a proposal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I actually have a motion prepared, which is in essence bullet point 2, which Caitlin has up on the screen. And I'll wait till the motion gets up and I will speak to it. Okay, great, thank you. So my motion is move to use the stakeholder survey report as a basis for a horseshoe crab management objectives workshop, which would include a small group of managers, scientists, and stakeholders to explore different management objectives for the Delaware Bay origin horseshoe crabs. This workshop should focus on multi-year specification setting and modeling approaches when selecting no female harvest. The intent would be to provide a report to the full board in time for the 2025 specification setting process.
Thank you, Shanna. Do we have a second? Joe Semino. Would you like to speak to the motion, Shanna?
Sure, thank you, John. So, I'd also like to echo my big thanks to Caitlin. I think that the survey was definitely the correct move forward. However, the results of the survey lead me to believe that we definitely need to start to have more open conversations about what our management objectives should be. If we are not going to continue to harvest female horseshoe crabs, I think that the Delaware Bay states have had conversations, and like Mike just commented, it's not that our harvesters don't wish to harvest females or don't have a market for harvesting females, but at the time right now, the public is very interested in us not moving forward with harvesting females. So in that case, I think it's incredibly important for stakeholders, managers, and scientists that have an interest in this Delaware Bay origin stock to have a discussion on what our management objectives should be, and find those. They're going to oftentimes be conflicting, but make that determination on what we do when we don't harvest female crabs, and hopefully can move forward in a multi-year specification setting process. So the board can make a decision, hopefully ahead of time, as to the period of time that they'd like to select to not harvest female horseshoe crabs and move forward with that. I think that this really mirrors what we did for Atlantic Menhaden, and that turned out incredibly well. It was really, really helpful to have everyone in the room to discuss how to move forward. And I look forward to hopefully getting this process up and going if the board agrees.
Thanks, Shanna. Joe, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, I think, unfortunately, we're seeing that, impacts of climate change progressing possibly faster than we thought. And certainly we're at a level far beyond what we experienced when we first started this process. So I'm proud of this process. And I just think this is a next step forward for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Do we have further discussion of this motion? Anybody have anything they'd like to add? Not seeing any. Is there any need to caucus? Not seeing any. Let's see if we can do this the easy way again. Are there any objections to the motion from the board? Not seeing any. The motion is approved by consent. Thank you. Okay. We're going to move on now to item number 6, which is consider approval of the fishery management plan review and state compliance reports for the 2022 fishing year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm going to move quickly to try and make up our time. So this is our management history for horseshoe crabs. The most recent addition is, of course, Addendum 8 in 2022. And then this figure shows the annual values of reported horseshoe crab bait harvest in orange and biomedical collections in light blue and estimated biomedical mortality in dark blue. And values are in millions of crabs. The total reported bait harvest in 2022 was 570,988 crabs, and this excludes confidential landings from Rhode Island and Florida. And the 2022 landings were a 23% decrease from 2021 and still well below the Commission's coastwide quota, which is 1.59 million crabs, and the total state imposed quota, which is 1.03 million crabs. The states of Delaware, Massachusetts, New York, Virginia, and Maryland made up 99.7% of the 2022 coastwide landings, with Delaware, Maryland, and New York harvesting the highest numbers. And then for biomedical in 2022, the number of crabs that were collected for the sole purpose of LAL production was 911. My brain is going today. 826 crabs, and this is a 26.8% increase from 2021. And the estimated biomedical mortality was 145,920 crabs, and this number includes the observed mortalities reported by each state, as well as an additional 15% of the total crabs that were bled and are assumed to die. In 2022, the biomedical mortality represents about 20% of the total directed mortality for horseshoe crabs, which is about 717,000 crabs. So compared to 2021, in 2022, the biomedical mortality estimate increased, but the overall total removals, including bait harvest, decreased. And this graph is just showing the total coastwide mortality of horseshoe crabs by year, broken out by bait and biomedical mortality, so you can see the relative magnitude of each of these sources of mortality. For de minimis states, states can qualify if their combined average bait landings for the last 2 years are less than 1% of the coastwide total for the same 2-year period. And in 2022, requests from South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida were submitted, and they meet their criteria for de minimis status. And the PRT made a few recommendations based on the review of the annual compliance reports. First, as usual, is to seek long-term funding for the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey, which is critical data for our current management program. And then they also recommend working towards getting annual estimates of horseshoe crab discard removals. And then with regard to the state compliance, the only minor issue noted by the PRT is that reports from Massachusetts and Connecticut were not submitted by the deadline. And other than that, all states and jurisdictions appear to be in compliance. The PRT recommends approval of the state compliance reports, de minimis requests, and the FMP review for the 2022 fishing year. Take any questions.
Thank you, Caitlin. Any questions for Caitlin about the FMP review? Roy Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Caitlin, do we have any information on what % of the biomedical take and or mortality are female horseshoe crabs as opposed to males?
We do. It would take me a minute to track down the numbers of male and female percent for the biomedical mortality. That's what you're looking for. Okay, I can look that up.
Okay, while Caitlin's doing that, are there any other questions about the FMP review? Seeing none in that case, would somebody like to make the motion to approve? I have Mike Luisi.
Is there a motion prepared?
You want to? You want to go ahead?
I'm part of the new old. Or
Yeah.
I'm getting close to the new old,
Okay,
so.
Mr.
I don't
New
wanna
Old
try to-
Luisi. Can you read that? Is it big enough font?
Of course it is, John. Move to approve the FMP review, state compliance reports, and de minimis requests for South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida for the 2022 fishing year.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? Emerson Hasbrook. Is there any discussion of this motion? Seeing none. Is there any objection to this motion? Seeing none, the motion is approved by consent. And Caitlin, you have the numbers for Roy?
I hope so. I have a massive spreadsheet, and I believe that in 2022, the males collected were 43.29% and the females were 34% and the rest were unknown.
Thanks, Caitlin. Okay, we finished item number 6, and now we are on to the number 7, which is report on the status of synthetic endotoxin testing reagents. And that's Caitlin also.
Thank you. Give me one moment to catch up. All right, so I want to start off by saying that I'm obviously not an expert on this subject, but at the last meeting, the board requested a speaker from a non-biased third party like the FDA. I'm not the FDA, but we did reach out and we weren't able to find a speaker for this meeting. So I pulled some information together and did my best to gather what might be helpful. So for some quick background, LAL has been used to detect pathogens or endotoxins in patients and medical devices and injectable drugs for over 40 years. And it's currently the standard endotoxin test in the US. And as you all know, there's been building public interest in transitioning to synthetic tests in the US. And alternatives to LAL that are not derived from horseshoe crab blood directly are, they have already been developed. They're called recombinant factor C, RFC, and cascade reagents, which is RCR. And these are available for use in the US, but they are subject to additional testing every time they're requested to be used to validate that they're comparable to using the LAL test. So part of this is related to the standards that are set by the US Pharmacopoeia, and I'll say USP for short. This is an independent scientific nonprofit organization, and its purpose is to set standards for healthcare products in the US, collect information on those, and disseminate it to providers and consumers on using the products. And the USP standards have legal recognition in the US, and they're also used in many countries around the world. So at this time in the US, my understanding is that the two recombinant endotoxin tests, RFC and RCR, are considered alternative methods to the LAL test, and that means that using them requires demonstration that they're comparable to the LAL test for each and every product that they would be used for. So recently, though, the USP has proposed adding a chapter to their compendium that would specifically provide standards for the use of these two recombinant tests. And as proposed under those standards that are in this new chapter, it would mean that moving forward, if a manufacturer wants to use one of these two tests on a new biopharmaceutical product, that it would not require the comparability validation that is currently required. However, for products that are currently being tested with LAL, they would need to demonstrate comparability in order to switch over to using the synthetic tests. So in summary, what I think this means is that if the proposed USP chapter is adopted by the Pharmacopoeia, it would open up a pathway for more use of RFC and RCR in the US, and there may be additional requirements from the FDA related to its use, but it is a step forward. And it's clear from their information that it wouldn't mean that LAL would go away. It just means that manufacturers would have more options that are more easily accessible to them. So this is a proposed chapter, and it has a comment period that will be open from November 1st through January 31st, 2024. and I can attempt to answer questions, but again, I'm not an expert, so I can always just write them down and bring answers back later.
Thank you, Caitlin. Very interesting. Just one thing that I wasn't clear about, are RFC and RCR pretty much do the same thing? I mean, they're like Coke and Pepsi. So
Yeah, my understanding is that they're just different genetic combinations.
okay, great. And are there any questions for Caitlin about the LAL and the synthetic endotoxins here? Okay. Oh, I see Dr. Rhodes in the back there. I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm afraid I'm the one that brought this up at the time, because we did have a presentation quite a while ago where they were, talking about these new combinations being used. This information is interesting, but it's basically just saying if you want to change from the gold standard, you have to prove it's as good as, but we haven't learned what the as good as is. So maybe it is Coke and Pepsi, and we're dealing with Coke, which I still think is number one, and want to know if Pepsi is going to be as good as. I think the problem, if you try and look it up, there's lots of information about the recombinant testing agents, for want of a better word, but they tend to come from industry, and each one is going to have their own bias about it, which would be the hard part. I mean, at some point, and like I said at the meeting before, it may be a year from now, if we could get someone from NIH or a Farm D possibly that could come in and kind of explain the process and where we are. I mean, it's great where we're at, but as far as I know, most drugs are still LAL. Every vaccine that's used in the United States, LAL is what's used to prove its safety, that it has no endotoxins in it at this point. And just for our knowledge, since frequently every letter we get says, well, why are y'all still using this when there's a safe alternative? Well, as far as I've read, it probably is, but probably isn't safe enough for the public when we're talking about health concerns. So that's why I'd like to see if at some point, we could get someone, and I would think it'd probably be when we're in Washington, where we could get someone from, one of the branches. And I know how impossible it might be to do, but, I'd love to talk to you at some point and see if we could get kind of, this is what it does. Because when you read about the specific tests, there are certain ones that have problems with drugs that have proteases, and some with glucans, and they have shortcomings, as does LAL, but LAL is a huge step above the rabbit test that was before that. So I won't go on and on about it, but I appreciate getting that, this page, but it's more about, well, if you can prove this, then you don't have to use it, as opposed to, is this as good as, which is what I was hoping for. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. It's a complicated issue, isn't it? We have a couple of online commenters. First up is Alan Burgesson.
Good afternoon. My name is Alan Bergenson, and I am an author of several of those papers that folks have been discussing. And one thing about recombinant factor C and the R cascades, it's not Coke and Pepsi, it's Coke and lemonade. Both satisfy your thirst, but using different mechanisms. RFC is just the recombinant of the detection protein with a different measurement. It uses light, whereas the RCR also has the same enzyme system that LAL does, all the complete cascade, but it yields a turbidity or a chromogenic result. Now, one thing that I published back in March of this year was in the Pharmacopoeia Forum, which is the official journal of the United States Pharmacopoeia, was a comparison of 2 standard LAL products against two of the RFC products. And one thing to note, and folks have to understand, all the reagents don't work the same on every time. And in my study, I showed that some reagents underpredict the amount of endotoxin in a sample. And this is natural endotoxin from a water system, which is what would be contaminating your products. Your product is not contaminated with the standard, which is known as RSE, or reference standard endotoxin, or controlled standard endotoxin. If you have either one of those in your product, you don't have contamination, you have sabotage, because those two don't exist in nature. What does exist in nature is what's in your water system. So I published a study using 4 different drugs and 4 different kits. And in some instances, the recombinant product underpredicted the amount of endotoxin in a drug by a twofold, by more than a twofold, which means nothing if you were testing down around normal processing, very low levels of endotoxin, plus or minus a twofold is negligible. However, when you were up around the endotoxin release level, or if you're testing at the maximum valid dilution, which is the most you can dilute and still detect the endotoxin, and you have a plus or minus twofold difference, and you're underpredicting the amount of endotoxin by more than a twofold, then there is the potential health issue. So it concerns me that that the USP has said that all new biopharmaceuticals, if this chapter is approved, do not have to do the comparability, because that is the most dangerous part right there. The company may recover their PPC spike. Oh, sorry, I'm over time.
Thank you, Mr. Burgessson. That was very interesting. I think that gets to some of what you brought up, Dr. Rhodes, about that, and appreciate that. And we have another online commenter, and that is Joe Gresco. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up to the doctor's line of questioning. And to be clear, the synthetic alternatives would need to be validated by the FDA, right?
Is that true, Caitlin? Or
I am not
No.
an expert again, so I don't know if I can answer that question with certainty.
I can answer that if you want.
Please.
Was that a no? That it just has to be done by USP, not FDA? Is that what?
No, it's done by the individual end user, the individual pharmaceutical company, on a per product basis. They have to do the side-by-side comparisons and validate it, and then submit that validation data to the United States, or to the FDA in the form of a regulatory application. So the individual end user, the individual pharmaceutical company, has to do the validation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Burgessson. Okay, I think that concluded that. Oh. Okay, I'm sorry. We have another online commenter. That is Karen Hedstrom. Go right ahead, Karen.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I was late getting in there. I was just trying to gather my thoughts. Isn't there the Eli Lilly company already has some products on the market that are using the RFC instead of the LAL? Can anybody, one of the doctors, comment on how they got to the point that they're at? I understood that companies could independently pay for their own validations, but what the USP now is advancing to do is to actually take on some of that validation, and of course some of the cost of it, to allow companies that want to go down the route of using the synthetic to just make it a little bit more viable for them to be doing it economically and otherwise. Can somebody comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I don't know that we have anybody here that could answer that, but we will be returning to this issue in future meetings, I believe. So we will definitely be looking to get answers to that and other questions. So trying to save time here, let's move on to our next item, which is to review and populate the advisory panel membership. And Tina, do you have that ready?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer for the board's consideration and approval the nomination of Sam Martin, a commercial mobile tending gear fisherman from Maryland. Sam's nomination form said that he was convicted of a felony. That is an error. And that was validated by the state. So simply ignore that, but I offer it for your consideration.
Thank Mike, do you like to make this motion?
I sure can. If you can put that back up, I'll go ahead and read it. Okay, the motion, move to approve advisory panel nomination for Sam Martin from Maryland.
Do we have a second? Shannon Madsen, any objections to this nomination? Seeing none, the nomination is approved by consent. Okay, that brings us on to other business. We definitely have a few items. The first, I just wanted to clear up, Caitlin, as far as the specifications, are we done with that we want to discuss? I think it was kind of covered in the motion, right? Okay, so we're done with that. Dan, did you have something else that you want to bring up? Because there is a other business motion.
Yes, I want to plant a question. It's a rhetorical question at this point. Maybe we can pick it up at the policy board. Are we doing enough around the table as board members to estimate the use of horseshoe crabs in our various fisheries for other species, such as American eel and, of course, whelk, which is not an ASNFC managed species? And I'd like to pick that question up at the policy board. So I don't want to discuss it. I just want to plant the question.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Okay, and then the other business item that I spoke of at the beginning of the meeting, I think everybody saw in the meeting materials that there was another item from Earth Justice. They went back to one of the scientists they had worked for the previous analysis of the arm. This time he was supplied with the data from the trawl surveys, and he had the code, I believe, for the arm model right this time. And as you probably saw, he had several criticisms of the arm that were then turned into a huge press release snafu. And I think there is clearly a debate within our board, I'm sure, as to whether to respond and how to respond. And to kind of kick this discussion off, I'd like to turn over to Bill Hyatt, who had, I think, has a motion.
Yes, I do have a motion, and I believe you have it. If you could put it up, please. Sure. So very simple. Move to task the Adaptive Resource Management Subcommittee with preparing a response to the September 2023 review of the ARM framework by Dr. Kevin Shoemaker.
And I have a second from Mike Luisi. And Bill, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. All of you had the opportunity to read Dr. Shoemaker's analysis in our meeting materials. His analysis is detailed, and it raises some serious questions regarding the ARM model. For me as a board member, and I suspect for many others around the table as well, it's difficult to evaluate the credibility of this alternative analysis without having a response from our own folks and the folks who have developed the ARM model. Management of horseshoe crabs is obviously far-reaching and complex. That's what keeps us around this table for so long at these meetings. And so for all these and many other reasons, but particularly so that we as board members can better understand these issues, I believe it's important for the commission to develop a response to Dr. Shoemaker's analysis. And I'll add that I think this speaks to some of the previous discussion on this topic. I'll add that I doubt that this response will be the end of this discussion, but I believe it's a very important first step. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I'm going to ask Mike as the seconder, and then I'd like to take it over to John Suika.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I seconded this because what Bill said, I truly believe in. And, you know, I think when somebody goes out there and puts themselves out there and criticizes, or not to say that the only reason we would respond is through in a critical way, but if somebody's out there putting information together, expecting everyone to listen, and we don't have the opportunity to debate that, it really ends up a one-sided argument and there's never any real accountability on the individual or individuals that have put together the document that now has generated what I used before, the drama around the issue. So I just think it's a good idea. I think it's something we should do more of with other species that we manage, and that's why I seconded the motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. And now I'd like to turn it over to John, as John and Kristen will have to spearhead the work on this. So take it away, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification, if this motion should pass, I'd like to remind the board that Earth Justice also supplied comments from September 2022. They were very lengthy as well. So just up for discussion, would you want, if this motion passes and we are to respond, should we restrict our comments to those from September 2023 or September 2022 and 23 inclusive?
Well, from my perspective, John, I think that as if you're going to comment, including all, I think would be very useful. Any other comments around the board? Bill?
Yeah, certainly. My intent was what was included in our September 2023 for this meeting materials. And in particular, I know that the Earth Justice letters and Dr. Shoemaker's analysis sort of parrot one another. But I think from my perspective, I'm particularly interested in the detail within Dr. Shoemaker's report, as opposed to Earth Justice's cover letters, if you will.
Connor McManus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, from the two sets of comments, to what degree is there overlap, or has some of the 2022 comments already been addressed via ARM revision since then, or work since then, I should say?
Nothing has been addressed since the 2022 comments. With what was supplied in the board materials, they had their new recent 2023 comments and then the 2022 comments tacked on as an appendix. So I guess it's all there all together. But no, we haven't, as the ARM work group, we haven't done anything with those comments or discussed it or made any changes resulting from them.
Thanks, John. Any further comments on this? Shannon Madsen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm certainly not going to oppose this motion, but I do just want to warn that I feel that a lot of the questions and concerns that are in Dr. Shoemaker's paper have also been addressed quite a bit in the minority report, if I remember correctly. I appreciate whatever Dr. Suika and Dr. Anstead put together for us to review directly in relation to this 2023 updated report. But I just want to make sure we don't run down a path of continuously asking our incredibly busy TC and ARM group to make responses to what frankly equates to misinformation. Some of the information already contained in the report we can look at and know that they're incorrectly using some of the trawl information. So just wanted to kind of make that point to not set a precedent for continuing to chase our tails on some of this information. Thank you.
That's a point well taken, Shanna, but this is quite an extreme situation we're dealing with. Roy Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quickly, in response to Shana's suggestion, I think that this particular response on our part is in a different category, because Dr. Shoemaker's response, I think, is driving the impetus for consideration of additional legislation in one or more states. And therefore, I think it's incumbent upon us to respond to this particular set of comments. Thank you.
Yes, it certainly has been resonant in our little state, that's for sure. For Joe Semino?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a follow up. I mean, for something like this, it goes back to something Mike Louisi said about accountability. You know, we had a chance to review the draft since New Jersey's trawl data was included. Noticed that it was, you know, that the way it was run in Dr. Shoemaker's model was not comparable to what was used for the peer reviewed assessment or ARM framework. So we confronted Dr. Shoemaker on that, and he confirmed that he did not use the data in the same method, and if he had time, he would try and go back and rerun that. So I think, you know, for this kind of information to be at management level, it would also need an independent peer review to go through the work. I don't see any other way around that, and I certainly don't think it's there. I apologize to John and Kristen for having to do this work, but I think at least some review for the board's sake will be valuable. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Are there any other questions, comments? Seeing none, does the board need time to caucus on this? Seeing no need to caucus, are there any objections to this motion? Seeing none, then the motion is approved by consent. And thank you very much, John and Kristen. The ARM has done phenomenal work. We're sorry to put extra work on you, but I think this is important to do. Thank you. Okay, that was our main other business item. And is there anything else to come before the board? Seeing none, then we are adjourned.